The House Intelligence Committee held an open hearing to examine the 2025 annual threats assessment. The topics range from the American war on terror to drug cartels to the infamous signal chat, which multiple government officials, especially Democrats, wanted to focus on. But what else did the hearing address? What are the international threats which demand American attention now? Well, here to discuss this, Ryan King, the politics reporter at the New York Post, who covered yesterday's hearing and the one in the Senate the day before. Ryan, welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So besides the signal chat discussions, what were some of your takeaways from yesterday's hearing in the House?
One of the big takeaways was the concern that the intelligence community has that U.S. adversaries, including China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, are working collectively, in part, to counter the U.S. And undermine America abroad. There was also a lot of emphasis on non-state actors, including cartels and other groups that have hurt U.S. national security. And there was talk, too, about the opioid crisis and about how synthetic opioids have killed over 56,000 Americans last year. So there were a variety of threats, and I think that the intelligence community is in a state of alarm right now about where the world is at.
So I do want to just address the signal chat for a moment, because that did seem to consume a lot of time in the hearing in both the House and the Senate. How much time was spent on that versus these major threats that are facing our country right now?
I'd say between both the Senate and House hearings, almost half the time, roughly. It was basically a situation where Republicans would tend to focus on the national annual threat assessment, and then Democrats would go back to the signal controversy. So about half the time was dedicated to the signal issue. And again, the hearing had been initially intended to focus on national threats.
So, Ryan, I want to get your take on that. What do you think this signal? I mean, I know the media has been continuing to pound on it. Does this have legs, or does it go away?
I think this is going to stick around for a little bit because there are multiple lawmakers that have pushed for investigations into it, and it's something that Democrats, I think, are very unlikely to forget. So it might kind of go to the back burner for a little bit, but I think that this is something that Democrats are going to be interested in revisiting. And I think one thing that'll be interesting, too, is there's a trip right now featuring the vice president, the second lady, and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz to Greenland. So I think that that'll be interesting to see how that goes with Waltz going to Greenland after he had been the guy that admitted to inadvertently adding the Atlantic editor-in-chief to that signal chat.
So let's go back to the threats. In looking at and laying out the various threats, was there a sense of what is the greatest threat right now, what we need to have our eye on right now? I mean, there's multiple threats, but did any rise above the others?
Well, the report described China as being the most capable threat against the United States, but it was basically suggesting that China, of the four main adversaries against the U.S., is has been the least adversarial in terms of aggressive actions. So it was kind of describing China as one of the biggest threats, and then as an ongoing threat. I think it was really focusing on non-state actors like the cartels and the impact that these groups can have on the U.S.
Speaking of the cartels, since the Trump administration has been in, there's been obviously a crackdown on the border. Is there any measurable difference in terms of the cartel activity, the fentanyl coming across the border?
Well, there was a recent study by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill that had suggested, based on some preliminary data from last year, that we've peaked in terms of deaths from fentanyl. So that's very early data, but that is a little bit reassuring. And then we've also seen from the encounters at the U.S.-Mexico border that they have plummeted very significantly relative to last year under the Biden administration. And the Trump administration has announced a number of pretty high-profile arrests when it comes to some of the cartels and gang members.
Yeah, for instance, this morning, an MS-13 leader was arrested in Virginia, apparently a leader in a region, including Virginia. So is there any sense that, all right, we've kind of stopped the flow of them coming in, and now it is a mop-up, cleanup operation, getting those that are in the country that pose a threat and getting them out?
It's hard to say for sure. I mean, right now, it kind of looks like it's the latter. It looks like the big problem has kind of been kind of abating a bit, and now the Trump administration is kind of focusing on just kind of cleaning up the rest of it. But it is hard to say right now because it's still pretty early.
What was the discussion regarding Iran and their nuclear capabilities?
So one thing that the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, had told both the House and the Senate Intelligence Committees is that the intelligence community assesses that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon. It was a pretty interesting claim from Gabbard. She said that this is something that they're monitoring very closely. And she also cautioned that Iran has the highest levels of enriched uranium that they have had, and that they have much higher levels of enriched uranium than they would need to pursue a peaceful nuclear energy program.
Very interesting. Any surprises for you, Ryan, that you took away that you thought, oh, because I know you track this, keep your finger on the pulse. Anything that really surprised you?
Well, two things. First was what actually we just mentioned about what Gabbard said about Iran, that assessment that Iran isn't pursuing a nuclear weapon, because that's quite a bit different than what we normally hear. And then the second thing, I think, with the signal chat was both Tulsi Gabbard and the CIA director, John Radcliffe, had been saying that they personally didn't share classified information. And it seemed like Democrats were really going after them about how they were describing that. Both of them were trying to suggest that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was the one that would have been tasked with determining whether or not the information shared on the signal chat that leaked was classified or not. So I think that that's something that could be revisited in the future.
Very interesting. Well, Ryan, thanks so much for joining us. By the way, are you on Signal?
Yes, admittedly, yes.
All right. Well, so am I. I'll call you later on Signal. All right. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate the insights and observations.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.